Well, I'm here with Bob Hunter, and I've wanted to talk to Bob Hunter for a long time for a variety of reasons. But one is because I've really wanted to figure out what happened with the Human Rights Commission in the city of Richmond. And the reason I wanted to figure that out is because ever since I heard that there had been one, I keep running into instances where it seems like having one in place would be important. And so, anyway, my guest tonight is Bob Hunter. And Bob, I want to find out a little bit about you before we go into the Human Rights Commission, because you, when you came to our school, you told some stories about your own life. And I think bringing some context, people sometimes forget. We know there's present day issues of human rights violations, but we forget what it was like. And you grew up, where were you born?
Yeah, I was born actually in Oberlin, Ohio.
Okay.
And my dad was a pastor in Oberlin. He pastored the Christian Missionary Alliance Church there in Oberlin. I was born in 1947.
Okay.
So that makes me 73,
What? Ooh.
Yeah. So.
And just to give context to Bob, I think I first met you. Do you have like a special recipe for TVP or something?
I do. In fact, I just made some this afternoon.
Okay, that's how I first met you.
Did you meet me with my TVP? That's a long time ago. I just resurrected that probably today. So
you were the key to selling some of that stuff. I ran the Clear Creek Co-op for a year.
Right.
Summer years ago, and then you saved me one day. I was the interim religious life director at Earlham, and you came in, and one of the people who was supposed to play the piano was involved with Zombies game. And I think this was it. And she ended up not being able to play because she was tired from playing Zombies or something. I can't remember the whole thing, but I remember you stepped in and played the piano. So
there was another pianist, and I've been in situations where you just don't know the songs and you don't know what you're doing.
She hadn't practiced.
Know the audience.
She hadn't practiced because she'd been playing Zombies versus Humans.
Yeah, something happened, but I did. Yeah. In fact, I remember who the speaker was that morning. It was Olivia Myers. She was a student.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, and I still hear from her now and then via Facebook and
good.
Occasionally. So yeah.
So 47, you're born in Oberlin, and some context, like what was Oberlin like in the 50s? What was that community like?
Well, Oberlin, of course, was always a progressive school, and so it wasn't a bad place to be raised as a child, though I didn't live there. I moved by the time I was 3. So okay. I don't remember a whole lot, but I do remember my mom taking us around the corner to Gibson's candy store where we would get eclairs. And to this day, I love eclairs. Part of my problem, that trying to lose weight, eclairs are not the thing. But yeah, eclairs. And my mom always said, Bob, you like to argue because you were born in Oberlin. And I think she saw it as a place where intellectuals argued or something, and so that was kind of her thing.
Were there other Black families in Oberlin?
There were. My dad pastored a Black church.
Okay.
The Christian Missionary Alliance Church was a Black church. It was connected to a number of, it actually had, before my dad, it had a white female minister from Scotland who had come over to the United States as a kind of missionary to the United States. And she pastored that church. And at the time of her pastoring it, it was pretty much a multicultural church. It was a diverse church. With a small smattering of white in the congregation, but
so is that odd for the 40s? I mean,
yeah, it was. Oberlin was odd because it was, of course, Oberlin was the first integrated college in the United States.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And it had that history. It had a religious history of Finney, and Finney was a itinerant evangelist, but he would not, he had his congregations integrated, and that he would not, he held promiscuous assemblies the word promiscuous has acquired different meaning than we.
Yeah, when you say that now, I'm beginning to go, what? But you mean something else.
Yeah. It just meant that the men and women could sit together. They were
What?
intermingled in the audience. Yeah. So Finney was a sort of a radical abolitionist at the time, and was leading a kind of abolitionist movement. So that's the history of Oberlin, the context in which the school grew up, and allowed that town to be a sort of progressive town, and it's still a progressive school. I mean, it's
growing up in Oberlin, but you moved pretty.
We moved to Cleveland, Ohio,
which is very different. I take it.
It was very different, but we moved to a place called Woodmere Village.
Okay.
And Woodmere Village, the residents, it was actually a stop along a Kinsman Highway, but Woodmere Village had about 4 streets that were located there that were sort of residential. And I grew up in the most diverse neighborhood for its time imaginable. In fact, it's not even imaginable now, really, because we had rich Black people. On the corner of my street was a guy by the name of, I'm forgetting his name now, but he headed up a sausage company. And he was a millionaire,
Wow. Okay.
Probably a multimillionaire, probably more than $1 million. But also on the street were poor Blacks, some poor whites, some rich whites, some middle class folks along the way. So I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. The guy across the street from us was a Black man who said he was spiritual but not religious. So, I mean, that was, you hear that a lot these days, but that made no sense to anybody in those days.
No, not too much. Yeah. Yeah. So you felt pretty supported,
I did in the neighborhood, but we went to a predominantly white school.
Okay.
And it was a rather wealthy white school in the Orange district. It was called Orange School. And it was grade school, middle school, or junior high at the time, and high school. And I was the only Black person in my class for most of those years.
Okay.
As was my sister and brother. Those were the two. My family had 7 kids, but those were the 2 that were closest to us.
And I don't know if you can tell the story here. It's not, again, we're mixing things in with context, but with your mom not being allowed into one hospital.
That didn't happen quite yet.
Okay.
But that was later. But let me get to a couple of stories about the school and then go back.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
At the school, oftentimes we would be picked on. I mean, there was times, and I remember the damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because there was a little wimpy kid who kept picking on me, and I tried to ignore him and, get away from him and stuff. And the class started going, "Ooh, Bob's scared of that little kid. Bob's scared of that little kid." So finally I got enough of that. So I knocked him down. I just kind of pushed him, I think. I don't think I actually hit him, but I knocked him down. He fell to the floor. And then the class started saying, "Bob Hunter hit that little kid. He hit that little kid. How could, what a bully he is." So I knew that I was boxed in.
Were you aware of why? Was it because?
Oh yeah, I knew it was race. There was no doubt that there was race going on. In fact, as a group, the kids in that elementary school, we used to stick together, and occasionally we would hear Johnny or Susie or somebody is being beaten up by their class, and they've been threatened. So we would gather together and we would ride the bus of that kid. This is an extended school district, rural. So we would ride the bus of the kid.
And who's we? Who's we?
All the Black kids in the school.
Really? Okay.
Would get on the bus and ride the bus, all that could, all available, would ride the bus of this kid all the way back to the school. And then we would call our parents and tell them that, on payphones, we didn't have,
Right.
so you get to a payphone somewhere and call our family and tell them that we're going to be riding the high school bus home. So we would escort this kid to their stop, and then go back to the school, and then get off and get on the high school buses that were going to our particular location.
So how you had like a network of communication. I mean, and for some people, like you talk about payphones, I mean, I don't know what you grew up with. We had one phone in the house. And so
yeah,
communication wasn't like it was today. How did that communication work?
We just voiced on the playground. Wow. On the playground, we'd say, Johnny's got a problem. We got to get on the 3 bus going home.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was. And this wasn't every day, but it was
sure,
occasionally. And we would do that. I don't remember being escorted home, but I had an older sister who she would flail, and she would just go after people when they messed with me. So I had kind of my own security team there. One person.
Well, I mean, you're talking about you're born in 47, and you're talking about 60s.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're talking the 50s here.
Yeah. So the United States is all, no,
the 60s. The 60s are my high school years and into my college. By 68, I was in college. I was in college when Martin Luther King was killed, for example, and we'll get to that in relation to the Human Rights Commission.
Wait, so you're going in this high school, Orange School, is it?
Yeah, Orange School.
And you've definitely experienced. I mean, you're the only Black kid in your class, and were you able to go over to kids' houses, or they come to your house?
Well, we did occasionally. That wasn't because we were all spread out. We weren't in the same neighborhood. I do remember one guy from my class showing up at my house. He was kind of a bully. He was known to be a bully. But he seemed nice enough when he was at the house, although my mom said, I don't trust this kid. And the next day he told people stories of he said we had a pile of, well, he said shit at the time, and they roll around in it. That's how they stay brown. So he was saying stuff like that, which it wasn't believable by anybody, I don't think, but it was just.
But we got a lot of that going on today with things. So and that would be a horrible thing to take home.
Yeah. One incident that I think is relevant right now is that my mom, for a little while, because we were on Kinsman Avenue, they had people that would guard the streets. And I believe it was during this period, but it might have been later in Decatur, Illinois. We later moved to Decatur by the time I was in 5th grade. But my mom did, she was a crossing guard. And there was a time when some guy just ran by her, ignoring her. And as the car went by, she just she was trying to stop him because there was potential for kids to be in the intersection. She kind of hit the car. And of course, the guy sued her for hitting his car, which is very relevant to the situations going on in Richmond right now with that whole car thing. So these kinds of things are in the back of my head as I see them, and I've just experienced it. Instead of him being charged, she got cited.
So people see something happen now, like in the Black Lives Matter group, a car drives in. And for some people that feels like it's outrageous maybe, but it's a one-time thing, but they don't this history that this is repeated over and over
again. Exactly.
And so it's almost like in the DNA of the country, right? So when to call it out and say, it's not a one-time, it's systemic, right? And that's what systemic means, is that it's not just a removable incident. It's something that, like, you've seen a lot over your lifetime.
Yeah, and that's why you think about, well, what kind of protections does a city have in place?
Right, and we'll get to that, but that's why it's so important to have advocates in place, because one individual, in this case, in this situation in Richmond, there is a group and there's some ability to have some advocacy. But in your mom's case, and that could happen again, you know, how much, right? So, and
Yeah.
you go and you have people in positions of authority who it's challenging to get through. So we'll
Yeah,
get.
they don't seem to get it, and you know, there's various reasons for it. But yeah, going on the situation with the hospital. My sister, fourth person. I have an older sister, and then there's myself, and then a brother, a younger brother, and then under him was a sister, and she was born with brain damage. And the situation of her brain situation was caused by forceps in birth. My mother was scheduled to go to a hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. We were on the outskirts of Cleveland, and my guess is that my dad made the appointment. My dad is very light-skinned, and growing up, he sort of grew up in both cultures. His family they had the biggest farm in the area during the Depression.
Okay.
My dad did not experience the kind of racism that my mom did, being darker skinned and being in Pennsylvania and South Carolina.
Okay.
I'm sorry, North Carolina. So growing up in those two spots, both in the South and in the inner city, she experienced things that my dad, growing up in rural, did not. But he was also very light skinned. And my guess is that he made the appointments to go to that particular hospital.
Okay.
And when he walked in with my mom, they said, she's not allowed here. We can't. So I don't know how that all went wrong, but she was in labor. So she had to find a place to go, and she found a home for unwed mothers that would take her. Now, please understand, she was married, and my dad was there, but this was the place that they could find in a pinch. And the medical care there was just not very good. And my sister had a forceps delivery, and they did damage. Forceps, you know, just kind of a pliers that you ply around the kid's head to help them out.
And all because the hospital wouldn't take her.
Color
of her skin, your mother.
Yeah. And that scenario was true in our lifetime. There was one time we got shot at when we went to pick blackberries. My dad had gone there a number of times, but when he showed up with his darker skinned kids, the people who was nearby saw it and shot.
So you grew up with that.
I grew up with the racism. Yeah, I knew
and the idea that
and I had been shot at least once or twice.
And the fact that you can say that calmly without it without being, is sort of in a way chilling, that it's just been a part of your life.
Yeah.
And I do think that's what people miss sometimes, because you are here and you are successful and you've lived through it, but that's a chilling way to live a life, right?
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, that's clearly what my experience has been.
And so then you see things like, you come into something like Richmond, right? And here's this commission, or there's opportunities, or maybe at that point there wasn't, right? And so how to have that voice that wasn't there, right? So what happened? So just a quick question. When you shot at picking blackberries, what happened? How did you?
We ran out of there. My dad grabbed us and we ran away, and we went back to a blackberry field that we knew was safer the next time. And
so no consequences for someone shooting at you?
No. You never had gotten anything done on that. I mean, this is the North even, but in the South, it was, of course, much worse. And we had friends in the South. We had a friend who was beaten severely for trying to register Black people to vote in the 60s.
And we're seeing some of that today in different ways. I mean, frankly, putting making people walk in when there's COVID out there, and all the sort
Long
of
lines in Georgia. We're seeing suppression, voter
yeah,
suppression.
yeah,
And
exactly.
it's coming from the Republican Party. I mean, there's no doubt
Yeah, I
about
mean, I
that.
think right. My sense of it, without being too editorials, they didn't make the changes necessary to be viable, and they're trying to maintain a hold on power. And the only way they can do that is suppress, because they're not meeting the needs of the people. But I won't go on too much of a soapbox. But yes, I think that's it, because if everyone votes and vote for their needs, they're gone.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that the country would clearly vote if voting were fair in the country. Trump never would have gotten in, and
Right.
I mean, you in this county, it may not look that way to a lot of people, but understand that voter suppression is clearly holding the country back from some important things, and one of them have been revealed, in the whole issue around healthcare. That in an
Absolutely.
emergency, the government has to step in, and Black people, we've been in an emergency all of our lives. This is
Hmm.
an emergency situation, and we only get progress when the federal government acts, and
Hmm.
particularly when the Supreme Court acts. That's why those issues are so very important to us. And as we see, I mean, this has happened before in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There were civil rights laws enacted, and they got a conservative Congress came in, appointed a conservative Supreme Court, and all those laws were overturned. So we've done it. It's not like we're on uncharted territory right now. This has all
Right.
happened once, and we
Right.
don't want it to
Right.
happen again.
Yeah, and I think those basic issues of um, housing, healthcare, and from my angle, and again, it's just a simple view. The Supreme Court in some ways ends up with stuff that's pushed there because representatives don't want to do it, because they know it's unpopular, because the popular view, people want healthcare, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
But right now, we're seeing a Supreme Court that could work against that. But the
yeah,
American people want it. And so, if what we have are representatives, they're supposed to represent us.
yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, there's a bunch of factors there, but hopefully that will change. I mean, hopefully we're seeing it kind of turn one way, but often, as that also can be pushed back the other. And I think that's where we have to go with really, looking at what's necessary for the people, for them to be represented. We're not all going to have the same amount of everything, but for God's sake, healthcare, housing, food, those basic qualities of
Mhm.
life, safety, right? Education.
Sure, sure,
So we can come back to sort of your journey, but let's look at that, right?
sure,
Representation.
sure.
How did the
Yeah.
Human Rights Commission, where were you at in Richmond when this thing got started? How did it
Well,
get
no, no, no. This goes back before me.
Okay.
The human rights laws started in Richmond in 1968
Okay.
during the 60s. So this is a 60s thing that was being organized across the country and certainly across, within Indiana.
Okay.
Byron Clutie was the mayor at the time,
Okay.
and he formed the Housing Authority and the Human Rights Commission. Those were
Okay.
two entities. He was very concerned about that. And of course, remember during this time, and I was actually to locate myself in this. I was nearby. I was at Cedarville College, which is a fundamental school,
Okay.
just the other side of Dayton, in Ohio. And I was at that school. We had heard that there was a big explosion in Richmond.
All right.
And that
Okay.
was the same,
Yes.
that happened at the same weekend when cities were going up in flames all over. Gary had exploded, Cleveland, Chicago,
After King's death,
after
right?
King's death. Yeah, there was
Yeah.
this
Okay.
whole, and that explosion happened very close to those events that same kind of weekend. So we thought that there had been some kind of incident, racial incident in Richmond.
Hmm.
It turns out that it was an explosion that was ignited by gunpowder in a sporting goods store in downtown.
Okay.
They're right there in the, the downtown area.
And history in Richmond is in some ways is kind of written with that, like before the explosion and after in some ways. So
Yeah.
really,
Yeah,
it's a
the
point.
architecture of downtown, the streets, and that's it. They went back and forth, but there was, that had a lot to do with it.
In 68, you have Byron Clutie kind of starting this stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think, I got to talk with Byron before he died. He lived quite a long time, and still know his wife, Elsie, who is still
right. She's in my writing group.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, she's a poet and quite an extraordinary woman. And so he put it together. I think there was my thoughts, in talking with him, I got the feeling that he was both thinking about the times that they were living in, the assumptions about what might have caused, because there was lots of speculation about that gunpowder. What was that much gunpowder doing down in that store?
Okay.
And the times were in fact like now, so that the kind of militias, those kinds of renegade white supremacist groups have always existed in the United States and have come out. They come out of the woodwork when Black people challenge the issues about our lives. And so at the time, there was this kind of pushback. So the questions were, what was that gunpowder doing down there? Was it being stored for some kind of militia use? And Clutie said he did not believe that the investigations didn't seem to point to that. But at the same time, he realized that because of the times, people needed to be brought together and the city needed to start enforcing some kind of protection for people.
Sure. Yeah.
So he formed the Human Rights Commission. And
so that's 68.
That's
so we're
68.
talking 52 years ago. This thing
That's
is
right.
started.
Yes.
And it's more than just like started, right? This thing is supposed to be happening, right?
It's a law.
It's a law.
Understand that this is an ordinance, which is essentially a local law that mandates certain things. So in 68, that happened. Just to go through the history, in 1976, the commission was defunct. It was defunded. It goes back and forth. In 1983, it was reinstated, and the ordinance was in 87, the ordinance was rewritten and based upon the state laws. The state by then had an ordinance. So the Richmond's ordinance was based upon the state ordinance. So it reads very similarly to the state ordinance. In 92, that's when I came on the commission. So I didn't come on the commission for a number of years. In 92, I came on. When I came on, the law department was sort of running it out of their offices. They were not. There was a commission in place, but there was never any investigations. The law department said to me, we don't want to cause trouble, and we don't want trouble for our.
So how about good trouble?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. See, there was not John Lewis to tell them that sometimes there's good trouble,
right?
We need to get in good trouble. And the attorney at the time would sit in all the meetings. So finally, the commission is empowered to choose its own director. So they fired the secretary of the law department as the commissioner, as the director of the commission, and chose their own. And shortly after I joined, I was chosen to be the chair of the commission.
So you're the chair, and we're talking in the early 90s.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
We had a budget of $10,000.
Okay.
And we hired a part-time director who was a spouse of an Earlham faculty.
Who was that?
Lisa. Wow. Lisa. I'll come up with
that's
the
good.
name.
That's good.
Yeah, she was.
$10,000. even in 90 isn't a lot of money. I mean,
No, this is pittance. This was
you know,
enough to sort of allow her to run, have a phone and
and
get a
what
little
kind of
stipend.
power did it have? Like, do you have any
Well,
authority?
let me reserve
Yeah,
that
yeah,
to go
yeah.
through
Keep
the
going.
ordinance
Sorry. Yeah.
itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll go through the history and then we'll look at the ordinance itself
Okay.
and how that changed. By 98, the funding was increased, and that was under the Republicans.
Oh,
Um,
that's see. Yeah.
yeah, so it was under the Republicans, and a full-time director was named. Ron Chappelle was named. He was a black Republican in the area, so black conservative, and we started business, get going. Um, Again, that eroded when that particular mayor left. Shelley Miller came in.
Okay.
Dennis Andrews was the mayor
Okay.
that reinstated the commission. Dennis Andrews, and so it was under his direction and leadership that the commission sort of grew.
And this was after Shelley or before?
No, this was before Shelley.
Okay, and then Shelley came in and it eroded.
And eroded. She got nervous because she had a meeting with the local businesses who said that they wanted the commission to stop being an investigative body.
But isn't that an interesting thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I said to her, I mean, we sat and we talked. I talked calmly. I was pretty, as one person put it, I probably was breathing through a bag, but I wasn't. I mean, I was, because this had been a long journey for me. I mean, I just know that racism is a factor in the United States, and businesses that have not had scrutiny don't want it. The commission, of course, was putting it together and trying to figure out how we could investigate and whatnot. So there was some missteps, no doubt, on our part as well. And so we were trying to, kind of figure this thing out. By 2010, the funding was gone.
Okay.
And this was under Sally Hunton.
Okay. So funding's
gone. There was some kind of a meeting that was held by businesses and some real estate owners and lawyers in town that sort of put together a scenario of how to defund it, And so that was.
So what's I mean, I can sense sort of if I'm a business and I don't want to have to deal with, I want to get away with whatever I get away with. Okay. But as a community, like, why would someone want to defund a human rights commission?
Well, I think that there's not all businesses were. In fact, we had one businessman who was on the commission because the commission wanted to represent businesses. And so Mike Nottingham was a commissioner at this time, running at that time First Fred Ford. And so that's a cars company, Ford dealership in town. And he was very much in favor of the commission. He was always cautious during meetings to try to give us the business side of things, that anything that we brought was of some cost to the business. And so we tried to negotiate that. I spoke a couple of times to the Chamber of Commerce to try to negotiate and talk. The first time that I did it, just very few showed up in the room. I mean, it was at a meeting for the chamber. It was at one of their meetings, their extended meetings, but people just kind of ignored it and left the room. So I always got the feeling that there was just a wet blanket of reception that we got, even though we tried to negotiate, talk, work through. Of course, we were working with some non-negotiables. We're talking about a law here,
Right,
ordinance,
right.
but certainly flexible in how we dealt with, the various businesses, the kinds of giving them time to figure things out. Their biggest complaint was that we were taking too long.
Taking too long.
Taking too long in the investigations. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And, I think we acknowledged that that was indeed an issue for them.
Well, what kind of things do you investigate on a Human Rights Commission? Like, what would come to you?
Well, almost any kind of things. Usually it was employment. We had employment issues, and we would hear those. We would decide whether there was probable cause. So here's the kind of procedure that we would go through. A complaint is filed, and we check to make sure that it had prima facie evidence. That's simply to say that it fits the allegations fit the kinds of things we can hear.
Okay.
So we would determine that, and then a letter of notice was sent with 3 options. We offered 3 options: mediation, and the respondent had to respond within 72 hours, or we would give them 10 days to fix and reach agreement with the person complaining, the complainant.
Okay.
Or 20 days to respond via written response. So they had a number of things. They could enter into some kind of mediation. They had 10 days to fix and reach an agreement with the complainant, or 20 days to respond. Usually that response would be, we disagree with this and we're going to stand our ground. We're going to leave it at what we're doing.
Okay. So did you have any legal sort of authority in this, or was
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Let's look at maybe the ordinance would help there.
Yeah.
Okay. So the purpose of the ordinance is 3250 is the ordinance for the Human Rights Commission. 32.50. 32 is under boards and what's it called? Boards and commissions. And 3250 has to do specifically with the Human Rights Commission. It's and the purpose of the commission, as stated in that ordinance, is it is the policy of the city of Richmond to provide all of its citizens equal opportunity for education, employment, access to public conveniences and accommodations, and acquisitions through purchase or rental or real property, including but not limited to housing, and to eliminate segregation and separation based solely on race, religion, color, sex, and by sex is gender, not handicap, national origin, or ancestry. So that was basically, we had it over education, employment, public accommodations and conveniences, any kind of purchasing, of real estate or and housing, and eliminating of segregation and separation based upon those categories. Okay. So that's the law.
Now, let's say I'm in housing that my landlord is just, now I own my own house, so I'm not in this.
Right.
My own landlord. So, but let's say, Richmond has a lot of varied housing, and I'm in housing that has black mold, for instance. Would I bring that to the housing?
You would bring that to the Housing Commission, but not the Human Rights Commission. Not our commission.
So separate issues.
We would not hear those kind of complaints. However, if the guy, you showed up at the house to rent a house, and the guy said, "I won't rent to you."
Okay.
We don't have anything open, and then you found out that later that day a white person showed up and got a rental property. Then you'd have a case and you'd take that.
Okay. So very specific.
Or if you got fired from your job.
Okay.
And you thought that you were fired because of race, you had heard him make statements, or you had heard somebody say something, or even if you had heard rumors to the effect and you were the only black person working there and the person they hired was white, you might raise that. And of course, raising that doesn't prove it to be true. It would trigger our investigation.
Okay.
And what we needed money for, and this is the The chicken and egg kind of problem is that you need money to investigate. So we would hire investigators, and for $10,000 to begin with, we had the only person to investigate was that one person who was working part-time. Well, that's not a very thorough investigation. So as we got more money, the investigations increased, and that got people more nervous. But it also was a kind of, as I was looking on, I'm trying to think we want the best investigators possible. The people we have may or may not be the best, given that we're only paying them, X amount of money. So so you need more money to do better investigations. And that was kind of the chicken egg thing there, as I said. It's a dilemma of figuring out how do you get the best investigations for this little amount of money that the city is allocating to you. You need good investigations to do that. And of course, the proposal of Shelley Miller and others at the time was to try to figure out, well, can we do this by just having, mediations? And yeah, I mean, mediations we were mandated to do mediations if we could. We wanted to. Ron Chappelle was always in favor of mediating if he could, to get something done. But when people put up barriers or they got an attitude and wouldn't deal with us, then an investigation would pursue. And
when it would seem like, and we know this doesn't always work that way, there's that resistance, but it's in the best interest of the business owners to investigate these things, especially if their business is not doing that.
Yeah, well, that was part of the dilemma, and I think that was Mike Nottingham's message. And I have him on videotape saying these things. In fact, we have one of the meetings that we testified when the people came out from all parts of the city to challenge the city council in removing the funding for this commission.
Yeah, so where did that get decided? I mean, it's the city council. So here's an ordinance. So technically it's supposed to be there. How can they just remove funding from it?
Well, the thing is, the ordinance does not mandate the funding.
Okay.
That's the trick. The ordinance says you have to have these things, and it says the commissioners are not paid. So we never expected pay. This was never about money for me. I was doing all of this free. Anything I've ever done for the commission was free. I never got a cent. Neither did others. The director was paid. The director was paid, and the investigators were paid. We were not. We were citizens of the community overseeing this thing. That's how we saw ourselves. We were not trying to make money. And so, and let me just say something about the makeup of the commission, just so that there are several members of the commission. 3 members were appointed by the mayor, and 4 were appointed by the common council, the city council.
Okay.
And then the mayor appointed the director. So the director was appointed by the mayor, but the mayor could not fire the director.
Okay.
So that was the trick. And if there is the appointments shall be made not later than 60 days from the date this ordinance shall be of full force and effect, or from the date of any vacancy occurs. So the law requires a commission to be in place, money or no money, with a director 60 days after a vacancy. And it's been 10 years. So
that's a lot of 60 days.
That's a lot of 60 days. And at this point, we are up against what I think should be a lawsuit against the city. I mean, I think
it does sound.
I think we need to sue the city. Is what I think we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, because having, again, if it were just funding, although that's a separate issue that probably should be happening also, but having those people in place makes it. I didn't know there was a Human Rights Commission. I heard at the Poor People's Campaign meeting at Bethel AME. That first found out. I forget who mentioned that. Might have been you. But point being that some of us that are somewhat involved wouldn't even know it was supposed to exist, right? but it is there, and not having it when you know it's supposed to be there it's easier to ignore it when nobody's on the commission, right?
Right.
Having that commission forces people to recognize both that this exists, but the importance of its existence.
Yeah, I think that's true. The other thing was that the paper never did a very good job on this, I didn't think. But that's my opinion. And, some of my friends were working for the paper. So, this is tricky. But I thought the paper always talked about it like, some of the comments in the paper were things like the group or the group that's supposed to help us negotiate. Those kinds of things were said about it rather than talking about it as if this is part of the city government that is mandated by law. That was just not part of the paper's. So the people in the community always had this feeling, well, we need something to help us, but it could be whatever it could be, and that sort of thing.
So let me ask you this, because I've heard one of the concerns. You're saying, okay, there should be a lawsuit. Is what stops someone from just saying it's because it doesn't sound like it's the funding, although the funding is important to give you some bite, right?
Right.
To have some real power, it needs some money to have quality investigators. Director. But what stops someone from at least appointing those commissioners?
Nothing.
It's not funding.
No, it's not funding. It's the refusal of the city council to do so, and the refusal of the mayor. Now the mayor has talked about renegotiating and putting something together, and I understand he's got something. He's working on something. But the point is that there's no reason. They are just blatantly ignoring the law.
Yeah,
and part of the I have talked to attorneys. Even Democratic attorneys who just seem to never have read the law. They never bothered to read this to find this out. And, I can understand, I understand people not understanding this because the paper was not clear, made it sound like it was an optional group, that we should have something like this that can help the city, and not understand that this is the law. It is still on the books. The city council can remove the law if they want to, but they haven't bothered to do that. And they could change the law, they could rearrange it, but until they do so, they are obligated to appoint somebody, and they should do that tomorrow. There's no reason
you're
why
loud and clear.
The mayor could appoint somebody, and the city council, and they are obligated by the law to do so. And after 10 years of this nonsense, it's time for somebody to do something. The state isn't going to do it because the state is full of Republicans, and Republicans have never cared for groups that watch out. I mean, this city has not cared for that. The city has fought labor unions for the same reason. The businesses in this community have been grazing on the grass of the people, and not without any kind of scrutiny. And so labor is not paid attention to. It's being weakened. It's being weakened by the Republican Party throughout our time. Now, the Republican Party does some good things, so I'm not just, I'm not against everything they put forward, and I'm not being totally partisan, but that's the truth of our situation.
Well, and this is why now I think we go through these periods of time where, so it's been 10 years, and the factors that make it both, I think, moral, but practical, even just to have this start to percolate up, and you start to see these problems, and you start
exactly
all the time, but they get worse, and people start to voice them. And I think that's what we're in, and that's why it keeps coming back to that, like, where can people go that have, need an advocate? And it sounds like this commission is it, at least having people in there, as almost the in-between between the council, the mayor, and the people. There's nobody, right? So it sounds like, really, I mean, beyond a lawsuit, to get it to happen, that there should be somebody appointed.
Yeah, yeah, no, they could do this. They could do this in their next meeting. There's
Okay.
nothing stopping them from appointing these things in their next meeting, except when I talk to people, they give me indications, no names are stated, but they give me indications that people in business don't want it. And of course, we have a community that does that. I mean, the prostitutes operating out of some businesses on the east side there. They arrest.
Well, and I
they
might
arrest.
not want
Let me
to
finish.
put,
Let me finish my
yeah,
sentence there. They
yeah.
arrest. They arrest the prostitutes, but they don't arrest the Johns because they're some of these same business people. That's the kind of city that we're running, and the people need to take control of the city. We can't have it just run by a few people with a lot of money that get to determine how things are, and the rest of us are their peons. That's not a good atmosphere for a city. And as you were saying, when we create that kind of atmosphere, people get discouraged, they get despondent. Companies come in here and they say, well, the people don't want to work and they're lazy. They're not lazy, they're discouraged.
Well, it's not a vibrant city, and you'll lose.
Yeah, because and they're not. It's not because they're lazy or because they're. It's because they've been demoralized by a community that doesn't take their interest and concern.
Right,
it's got
and
laws to protect them, but it does
lose
not
the passion.
Yeah, you lose.
I mean, to be honest,
you lose the will to life. You lose
right.
the will to life. You lose the will to keep going.
So you look at an incident like this Black Lives Matter protest.
Yep.
One of the students I know, so my brother knows about this incident back in New Jersey because one of the kids that is being charged is from my meeting in New Jersey, where I grew up. So my point is, like, these things also reflect maybe him coming back to Earlham. They reflect view Richmond also. It's not, so it's this ultimately it should come down to a moral piece about how the people in Richmond are treated, but it has impact and ripple effect well beyond. And so and having that structure in place is a start, right? It's not the end, but it allows for a place where people feel they can be heard.
Yeah. There's one more part of this, because
give me one more part.
3251 is another law, and that is in fact the fair housing law. So 3250 is the human rights law. 3251 is the fair housing law. And its policy reads like this: it shall be the policy of the city of Richmond to provide within constitutional limits for fair housing throughout its corporate limits, as provided under the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1968, as amended, the Federal Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 as amended, and Indiana Code 22951 as amended. So that's the goal, and that challenges discrimination in the sale of rental and housing, discrimination in residential real estate and such transactions, discrimination in the provision of brokerage services. It allows against interference in any of those cases, the prevention of intimidation in fair housing cases, equal access to housing and HUD programs, and so forth. So that's the law that does that. And the authority and responsibility for properly administering this law of this ordinance and referral and complaints hereunto the commission shall be vested in the Human Rights Commission of the City of Richmond, Indiana. So again, we have, without the commission, we also don't have fair housing, a Fair Housing Act.
And that honestly is still going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard stories, of years ago, but I've heard stories of in the last couple years here. So not, again, where does an individual go if they, if it's just an individual, sometimes they don't actually feel that power.
Yeah.
you
So,
know?
and we did have a lot of successes. I think of one young woman who came to us. Hers was a simple complaint. She had a certain kind of glove that she was allergic to, and she was not getting a successful accommodation, a simple accommodation to a different kind of glove. I don't know if the company felt it was a
Oh, where she
extra
was working.
expense.
Okay.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
was working at an employment, and we were able to get her the gloves, the proper gloves. We were not allowed to have punitive damages, but we did get people back their housing money when they were discriminated against, and sometimes reinstated into the housing if they wanted to be. Oftentimes that was an issue because once you get mistreated by by your landlord, you have a different relationship to them. So those kinds
Sure.
of things.
Sure.
So we had a lot of those cases that were successfully navigated. We had some that were successfully mediated, where we could, oftentimes the person would say, can I fix this? And we said, absolutely, we can fix this. Sure, let's talk. And so those kinds of things were there. But we often got an attitude from people in the business community, and my understanding is that they put pressure on the city council to get rid of it. And the city council has talked about doing some other things. There are some recourses you could try to take your case to the state, but they see themselves as not wanting to operate at that level, and only take the overflow and only operate in cities that don't have.
Well, look, here's the deal. Like, if you're someone, and you know this better than I, but you're someone with already a limited feeling of power, maybe
Right.
limited resources, having to go, maybe they don't even have a car, having to deal with somebody in Indianapolis is not
Yeah.
reasonable. Like, it's not
Exactly.
reasonable.
Exactly.
And so you give up rather than fight. And back to what we said before, that goes to quality of life.
And then you demoralize a community. And the way to make this community vibrant is to make people feel cared for. I mean, that is what Richmond needs. It needs people, it needs labor unions where people feel some kind of empowerment to protect themselves and their jobs. It needs this Human Rights Commission. It needs fair housing. It needs a fair housing law. And of course, we're breaking HUD laws, because one of the changes that we had in the fair housing ordinance was mandated by HUD. They wouldn't give money to the city to build some things downtown until this ordinance was brought up to speed and put under and that's when it was put under the commission. That's when 3251 was actually mandated under the commission, because they wanted to see somebody had specific authorization to deal with these things. And the commission they can appoint the people they want in these positions, but they haven't bothered. In 10 years, they haven't bothered. The mayor,
a long time.
The mayor could appoint somebody, but he and she, in both cases, the mayors haven't bothered. And so I think we need to put pressure on what a local citizen can do is to demand. We need to demand that this commission be reinstated.
Well, that has come across loud and clear. I think you've made a strong case, not only for that, but why in your life you've demonstrated why, having support, even if it's a group of kids that gets on the bus with somebody, to having a commission that gets together and works against, in some ways, it's bullying, right? It's the same thing, extrapolated out to a different role or different title, but and when you don't have that kind of group support, people give up.
And when they give up, the quality of the city goes down, the quality of your employees goes down, and so it's been a vicious cycle downward, and people don't understand. Mike Nottingham once said, You know, one of the testimonies was from someone from the business community said, we need, you know, if we have a Human Rights Commission operating, people won't come here. And Mike Nottingham said, do we want a business to come here that doesn't want a Human Rights Commission?
That's a great question.
You know, and that I think that's the deal. I mean, that's
Right. Yeah.
that's the way
Yeah.
it is.
Well, Bob, this is a start, not the end.
Okay.
And I'm really grateful because I've been trying to figure out, you've given me a lot of information, which is helpful. And because I've really been trying to figure out ever since I first heard that, it just struck something that there was something off without this that's happened with this commission. And we're missing out on not having it. Not only missing out, but it sounds like we're breaking the law.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, again, first of a conversation, hopefully we can move it into other areas.
Sure. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. So